What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Life of Mike. So I have gone and looked at a few bikes now, and none of them have really been exactly what I've been looking for. So I'm looking at something different today. I've had one of these bikes in the past, but it was an '06. And this particular motorcycle had issues with the crank in 2006 and 2007. So you guessed it, my bike had a crank failure. So I'm willing to give this motorcycle another opportunity. It's a newer year, so hopefully it doesn't have those same issues. All right, guys, so my intuition was right. We did end up bringing back a new bike for the channel. Really excited about this one. So I had actually went all the way to Jacksonville. I'm in Orlando, Florida. Drove all the way to Jacksonville with a buddy of mine to go pick up a 2007 R6S. But when I got there, the condition of the bike was not how it was described in the ad. So it was really tough to pass on it, but I ended up passing on it. Had really low miles, it ran great, but it just didn't look, I'm not a big fan of the R6S to begin with. So I was gonna buy it if it was pretty mint, but it was not. So I was like, you know what? We got plenty of time. Let's just wait for the right bike to show up. So I found what I think is a cooler bike at almost the exact same price point, and it is a 2012 Yamaha R6. So I really wasn't sure if I'd ever have another R6. I had a 2006 R6 the first year where they came out with this body style. And the '06-'07 models are actually prone to crank failure. And that is exactly what happened to mine. So I just had a really bad experience with the R6. And I didn't think I'd ever go back to them. But you gotta admit, this is one of the best looking 600cc sport bikes out right now. They completely redesigned the bike again, so this is still an older generation, but I think it just looks so mean. I love the center light here too. It's just a really cool platform. So really excited to have it on the channel. So now just a little bit of backstory about the bike. So I purchased the bike from a younger guy who he bought it with only, I believe, 5,000 miles. So this thing was in really good shape. It was his first bike, so he was learning on it. He did tip it over a couple times. Not a whole lot of rash here. You can see a couple scuffs here, some marks on the sliders there, but nothing too major. When he purchased the bike, it already had the Toshi exhaust on it. It was just a slip-on, not a full system. And of course, this being his first bike, like we all do when we're young, he wanted to make it louder. So unfortunately, what he ended up doing was doing a cat delete, which I'm not a fan of, and it's kind of hard to see here, but basically what ended up happening was when he did the cat delete, he wanted to have it dyno tuned. So he had it tuned. It was running perfectly before the cat delete. And after the cat delete and the tune, he started having issues at high RPMs. The bike was cutting off. So he took it back to the shop to see what the issue was. Now the shop pushed back and said, that issue probably existed prior to the tune. And to be fair, it was running fine when he left shortly after the tune. And he did show me the videos of it being tuned. So I have every reason to believe that it was on a dyno and it was tuned. They did an ECM flash as well, from what I understand. But when he brought the bike back to the shop, I believe he requested it just to be put back to stock. And so he told me the dealership put the ECM back to the OEM spec. But unfortunately, they didn't finish the repair, and the timeline, he had an issue with how long it was going to take for them to get back to this bike again. Many bike shops here in Orlando are pretty backed up. So unfortunately, he ended up taking the bike back before everything was completed and just in the state that it was in. So the bike is sort of halfway put back together. You'll notice all over the place there's missing hardware that I'm gonna have to get. You can see missing pop rivets everywhere. We got missing screws, some missing screws here. So I purchased this bike knowing that it is not a perfect running bike currently. So right now, essentially what he told me happened is when he picked the bike up from the shop the second time, when he goes to twist the throttle, there is no throttle response, but the bike will idle. And I was able to confirm that before I purchased the bike. I wanted to hear the engine run. But like he said, when you twist the throttle, you get no feedback. So this is a ride-by-wire system, so it is all electronic. You can hear when I twist the throttle bodies are moving. However, that does not mean that the ECM is going to allow you to actually apply throttle. So we got a battery in it. The battery was dead, so thankfully my friend let me borrow his battery, and I was able to see that there is a code 60 showing, which has something to do with the throttle servo motor. Now, typically the code 60, folks will say, well, you just go under the seat here, and there is a fuse box, and you look for the 7.5 amp ETB fuse. Now, in my particular case, that fuse is perfectly fine. So I was hoping that might have been the fix, because that would have, been super easy, but of course, that would have been too good to be true also. So next thing to do is to do the diagnostics. So I ran through the diagnostics on the dash, and typically when you go and do the first test, it will show a reading of 17, I think it's between 16 and 18 in the diagnostic mode. And as you apply throttle, that number will start to increase and roll up. However, when I twist the throttle, I get absolutely no response. It stays at 17 the whole time. So if it was 0, then I think we might have a wiring issue, but it's 17, so it's showing the correct baseline value. So we were saying this bike was kind of half put back together. You can see all the missing hardware. So the first thing I want to check is the throttle servo motor actually plugged in? If it was not plugged in, if it was rushed, when they were putting it back together, they may have just not plugged it in. So that would, be awesome if that's all that it was. Now, I highly doubt that. So I'm more suspicious that maybe something went wrong with the ECM tune or the ECU tune. But the first real work we're gonna do on this bike is to remove the tank, the airbox, take a look at the throttle bodies, and there's actually some tests you can do to see if the throttle servo motor works. So that's where we're gonna start, so let's get into it. Okay, so now I have access to the airbox. I went ahead and just propped the tank up. There was actually no bolt up in the front there, so I probably could have rotated this without even removing the side plastics there. It just rotates about that screw. And placed a towel in between a little 2x4 that I'm using to prop it up. I think we have plenty of room to remove the airbox and access the throttle bodies. Okay, so after spilling just a little bit of gas, it didn't make too big of a mess. I was able to get the airbox opened up, so now you can see the air filter, and you can notice if I turn the throttle, nothing happens because, again, this is all ride-by-wire, so we still need to dig a little bit deeper. But something I discovered just taking off the top of the airbox, you can see the fuel injector rail, and you can see that the injectors themselves are, at least 2 out of the 4 are not in the best shape. That one doesn't look too bad. See if I get my hand in there. That's not too bad. That's probably, these 2 are definitely the worst, and this one is not terrible. But I will probably swap out all 4 of these injectors just while we've got everything opened up. But now I'm gonna remove the air filter, we'll remove the rest of the airbox, and we should have access to the throttle bodies. That was pretty fast. So we've got the rest of the airbox out. So now we've made it to our destination and we are at the throttle body assembly. So right now it looks like all of the connectors are in fact plugged in. So that tells me that it wasn't hastily put back together and we just missed a plug. So what I'm planning to do now is actually pull out the throttle body assembly and we'll put 3 volts to the motor, the throttle servo motor. And if the butterflies move, then we know we have a good motor and it is an ECU issue. And if the butterflies do not move, we know we have a bad throttle servo motor, and we'll likely replace the throttle body assembly. So just to demonstrate, you can see if you twist the throttle on old bikes, like the CBR that we just rebuilt, it was a mechanical action there that would move the butterflies. And you can see here that it actually goes into a motor system that is electronic. So even though I'm inputting throttle, sorry, we've got some noise here. Even though I'm inputting throttle, we're getting nothing out of the butterflies. So if there's no signal going to the ECU that we're applying throttle, the engine will not rev for us. So let's go ahead and get this throttle body assembly out and get it tested. All right, guys, so I can actually do this test without removing the throttle bodies. I just tap into the harness, and here's 3 volts, 2C batteries connected together, 1.5 and 1.5 makes 3. So when I touch these together, we should see a little bit of movement on the throttle bodies. So we should see those butterfly valves start to move, and you can see they do. So this throttle body assembly is working perfectly fine. So that tells me that there is an issue with the ECU. So I'm gonna get that sent out for a flash back to OEM spec, and I think that should fix the problem. All right, so before I completely write off the ECU, I wanted to do a few more diagnostic tests. So what I've done is I put the bike in diagnostic mode. You can see DO1, we're gonna be doing a test there. And 17 is a good starting range. You'll notice though, if you apply throttle, you get no response out of the system because the ECU has essentially shut down this system because there's a fault somewhere. But this range should be somewhere around 16 to 18 up into the 90s, 100s. I'll put the exact range on screen, but you can see when I manually move the throttle body, you can see I get up to 99. So this one is testing out good. I've got a few, I've already done the tests here. These are my results, so we'll just do it again. We'll do D13. All right, we're gonna jump over to 13. Okay, we're showing 18 this time. Actually 17. And as I turn it, we get up to 99. There you go. You can see as I play with the throttle there, the values change. So that sensor appears to be good. Now we're going to move on to D14 and D15. I'm going to press it once. Now we're in 14, starting at 17. And again, I'll put the ranges on screen. I think it's similar, should be in the 90s, low 100s. And you can see we're only getting to 67, maxing out the throttle there. Wide open throttle, we're only at 67. So that is a red flag for me. So now let's go ahead and try 15. Looks like we're starting at 18 there. And maxing out, wide open throttle, we only get to 67. So there may be an issue with that sensor. I need to do a little bit more research to find out. Maybe it just needs to be adjusted, but that is certainly a clue that might help point us in the right direction. So I did a little bit more research into this topic, and so this sensor here is interfacing with the cables. So this is what's actually telling the computer how wide open you have the throttle, and this is the sensor over here for the valves themselves. So this sensor is testing out fine, which I'm happy about because it's got a special kind of torque spit there that we'd have to go and find in order to remove these. But this is just a Phillips head, or I could even use a socket, and we could do some adjustment on the fly. Right now, the top end of the range is only at 67, and that is considerably outside of the acceptable range. So I'm gonna see if I can adjust this on the fly to get it within that range, and if not, then I believe that sensor will need to be replaced. Okay, so this stuff is certainly confusing, but I think I actually just adjusted this for no reason, and let me explain why. So looking at test 14, you can see here I raised it from 17 starting point up to 20, and you can see that's demonstrated here by the paint mark shifted on the sensor. But here's the catch. So I was moving this originally by hand because I had to do so for tests 1 and 13. Now if I move it by hand, you'll notice this only goes to 70. So I thought this was a failure. But for this test, you actually have to use the twist throttle, which I'll demonstrate here. So I'm going to twist the throttle up here, and you'll notice that I can go the full range, and I'm actually fine. I'm towards the upper, allowable range there. So the throttle actually will go just slightly further than what the cable will allow you to go slightly further than what this throttle arm allows during the same test. So a little bit confusing. You can see we only get to 70 there, and then with the throttle we get to 104. So got to be careful how you do the tests. But what that tells me now is tested the motor, that's fine. Tested the TPS, that's fine. Tested the TVS, and that is fine. So literally all that is left is the ECM. So we've, by process of elimination, found the issue. So definitely going to get that flashed back to factory spec. Going to get an OEM exhaust most likely, just to kind of baseline things. And I think my science project is done for the day. So let's get that ECM sent out and get this thing running again. Now I know I seem pretty convinced that the ECU is the issue, and the previous owner seems to think so as well. However, I have my own suspicions about the throttle body assembly. Reason being, the throttle servo motor, when it receives power from the ECU, normally makes a high-pitched whine sound when you turn the key on, and I'm not hearing that at all. Now that could be A, that the ECU is not supplying the power, or B, that there's some sort of an issue in the potentiometer circuit, I don't know, but I didn't want to send out my existing ECU and maybe there's an internal issue with the ECU and a reflash doesn't solve it, or if there's some other hidden issue with the servo motor internally that I can't see. So what I've decided to do is I've ordered a new ECU off of a 2010 R6. This ECU was taken off the bike at 0 miles, and the owner of that bike put in his own flashed ECU for racing. I got a lightly used throttle body assembly here, and I've got that also to use as a test to see if my existing servo motor is bad or if it's the ECU that's bad. So I also just received my battery, so that's going to be installed here. And once the ECU arrives, we'll go ahead and test things out. But I did order a few other items, so my brake lever didn't quite fit right. If you look, you can see that, I don't know, maybe when the bike was dropped or tipped over, part of the boss there was sort of, there you go, there's a good angle of it. It's causing the lever to sit in the housing slightly, or in the clevis, just slightly off, which is constantly engaging the brake light. So I'm kind of doing away with the gold theme here, the blue and gold. I'm just going back to blue and black. So I've got new levers on the way. I haven't ordered a new foot peg yet. I do have, this foot peg I don't think is the problem. I believe it was the pin was too small, because as you can see, the fit here is actually good. It's just the pin was too loose, so it had a little bit of slop there. So as I drop it, so I've got the levers on order. I just received my battery. I just received the throttle body assembly. My ECU is going to be arriving soon. And I also ordered a new kill switch. So this kill switch here, I'm not sure why, but when I've attempted to start it a few times, it might be something internally with the contact. Probably just needs to be cleaned. But I got sort of a package deal when I purchased the ECU. And I also got a brand new O2 sensor, or a 0 miles O2 sensor from the same person who sold me the ECU as well. Right now I'm trying to decide on what slip-on I'm going to go with. Initially I was thinking the M4 Carbon, but everybody has that. I'm thinking I might actually do the LV10, the Leo Vince 10. So stay tuned for that. But For now, I think we can go ahead and get the battery situated into the bike in preparation for when we receive the ECU for testing. So in case you're wondering, I went with an ADZ10S X-rated motorcycle battery. I got this off Amazon. This was kind of a lower priced battery. I kind of wanted to test it out because it had a lot of really good reviews, hundreds of good reviews actually, saying it lasted at least 5 years. So I normally just get the local, shop the local stores, but I wanted to give this a shot. So I'll also report back to let you know how this battery fares. Okay, so the battery is now in place. I'm going to hold off on connecting it because I want to hook up the new ECU and the new throttle body assembly first for my test purposes before connecting the battery. So I'm just going to leave it here until those parts arrive, but it fit in there real nicely. Any advice to someone replacing the battery in the R6, I basically pushed it to the back first and then moved it up and it popped right into place. I do recommend moving the main fuse as well as the starter relay out of the way. And it's pretty easy to install. So since we're still waiting on a few parts, I think this is a good stopping point for the first episode in this build series. So thanks for checking out the channel. Stay tuned if you want to see me rev this R6 for the first time.